ourselves. Why don't we start with Representative Templeman?
David Templeman, Orleans 3. That's Brownington, Barton, and Westmore. And my fingers.
And
Orleans, but I was up in Orleans at the end of the campaign.
Oh, you were? How
Yeah.
did I not see you?
The whole town was there.
Oh.
I'll tell you. Brian, where were we? You guys are doing some fantastic work, renovating some of that old store.
Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic.
Oh, there's
We were in
Albany
Orleans.
maybe.
Yeah, it was all.
Albany.
Albany's-
Yeah.
Henry Pearl, represent Danville, Beecham, and Cabot.
Yeah, Jed Lipsky, Lamoille 1 represents Stowe.
Rodney Graham, Orange 3, represent Williamstown and Chelsea.
David Durfee from Shaftesbury and represent Glastonbury and Sunderland as well.
Heather Supernaut, Windsor 4, Barnard, Pomfret, and Bridgewater.
Esme Cole, Windsor 6, to represent Hartford and White River Junction. Thank you for coming the other day. It was great seeing you.
John O'Brien, represent Cambridge.
Mike Rice, represent the Bennington, Rutland District, Danby, Dorset, Landgrove, Mount Tabor, and Peru.
Josie Levitt, Grand Isle, Chittenden, all of Grand Isle County, and a little bit of West Milton.
And we met Ryan the other day.
Yeah.
Yep. And then we have another guest.
Yeah, I'm Rebecca Ellis. I'm the state director for Welch.
Nice to meet you too, Rebecca.
She's not a guest, she's in charge.
Understood. So, and you are?
Peter Welch. And, it was very interesting to me, listening to the towns you represent. And it's, as you know, just a little background. When I first got to the state Senate, I served on the Agriculture Committee in the Senate. And I'm not a farmer. Most of you probably aren't. But I kind of had this deep sense, which I know, given where you all come from, you obviously have, about the importance of rural values in the health and well-being of our state. And I served on the Agriculture Committee for a time in the House, and now I'm back on the Agriculture Committee in the Senate. And I'm in the Senate, you get a chairmanship of a subcommittee pretty quickly. So I'm going to be chair of the Rural Development Subcommittee. So it'd be really terrific to work with you. But what I'm just struck with right away is the situation you have where you represent all these small towns. And the fact is, those small towns shouldn't be incidental to what's going on. They should be the heart of what's going on. And I don't know what the deal is about not having some of the urban representatives. I mean, you can only be on one committee in the House.
Right.
That's the problem. But my whole view is that if we take care of our small towns, the big towns are going to be fine. And I think that because what I found is that in our rural parts of our state, people are pretty discerning. And this was just even the kind of a campaign ethic I had when I was running in Windsor County. I didn't spend all my time in Hartford or even in Springfield at that time. I spent a lot of time in Rochester. I spent a lot of time in Stockbridge, a lot of time in Pomfret. In my sense of my decision to do that was a sense that if people in rural towns, they kick the tires pretty hard. And if you do okay with them, you're going to do okay elsewhere. So, it's a pretty significant accomplishment to get the trust of the people in your communities that you're sitting here on their behalf in this committee. And I really want to do all I can to the always uphill challenge of creating the kind of sustainable economic opportunities in rural communities around the state and in the country, because I do think they really are critical to the well-being of all of us. So that's just by way of introduction and a sense of solidarity with this room and the importance of what you do.
Thank you. Did you have, I'm not sure how to best use your time. We've already had several issues that have cropped up where the sort of the answer was, oh, that's a federal thing.
Well, let's talk about that. You know, we've got the Farm Bill, and that's wide and comprehensive. And the goal I have in the Farm Bill has always been to focus on the things that are really helpful to, not, you know, for Vermont, but also rural America has something in common, whether it's rural Vermont or rural Indiana or Ohio. There's a lot of pressure on small farms. In Vermont, of course, we focus, it tends to be dairy and right now organic dairy. And I know you guys are wrestling with that. But the argument I'm making with my colleagues on the Ag Committee, and it tends to be a bipartisan committee, particularly in the Senate, and it was in the House, which is really quite wonderful because the folks are there tend to be like you. They got a feel for their rural communities, and that matters to them. And the challenges that the rural community faces in Ohio might be the same, similar here, even if the crop is different. Do you know what I mean? Right. Then there's a commitment to local agriculture. So what I'm trying to do in that committee is make an argument for local agriculture is essential. And that's true across the country, even if the nature of what that local agriculture is different in one region versus the other. But what it means for us in New England is that a lot of the federal programs, particularly the commodity programs, that unfortunately, in my view, have a tendency to favor the large producers, that puts a lot of pressure on the small producers. So my hope is to be working with other colleagues to get enough flexibility so that there's a commitment to this concept of local agriculture, and that then we try to design any kind of support programs around achieving that goal, okay? Now that is to some extent going to create conflict between the large big producers versus the smaller ones where the economies of scale are different, but where the importance of what they do locally is not less important. It may even be more important. The other thing we have a chance to do in the Ag Bill is to start making it economically advantageous for our producers to play a major role in carbon reduction. You know, agricultural practices have a lot to do. There's a lot of opportunity there to reduce carbon emissions. And if we're going to be successful, then we have to have that sector contribute to the carbon reduction. But if we're going to get that sector to contribute, it has to be something that they're paid for. It can't be just another mandate, another burden, another expense on top of already really tight margins. So those would be the areas I'm working in. You know, the rural development issues. There's a lot of broadband jurisdiction in the Ag Committee. We've gotten a lot of money for broadband, and I was the head of the broadband with one of my Republican colleagues, the Rural Broadband Caucus, which we were fighting on to try to get more attention for that before COVID. And a lot of our urban counterparts didn't think it was a big deal because they just didn't have the same problems that we had. After COVID, we've won the argument. You know, it's really been essential for us. And now the real question is deployment and making it work, and, you know, doing that hard work of getting it out to the last home, the last barn. And then there's a lot of housing jurisdiction within the rural development in the Ag Committee. So those would be areas that I'm working on, and I know how much you guys are all working on that here in Vermont. And I'd like to, through Rebecca and Ryan, coordinate with you in any way we can to be helpful, to help you be successful here on behalf of Vermont.
Representative Lipsky.
First of all,
Peter, yeah.
Peter, it's an honor for us to have you come to our committee. And one of the issues we've dealt with, there's a new name in our committee called food resiliency.
Right.
Ag food resiliency. I am represented historically, professionally as a logger and for 50 some years. That gives me the same sort of values that have been a serious concern and value coming from sustainable forest management of its carbon pool, sequestration and storage. And we have learned in this committee in the last 6 weeks how critical the carbon value, not of the same scale as forests, but in agriculture. But universal free school meals we've gotten a lot of testimony and advocacy for that. I think there's a strong consensus, not just in this committee, but in education, how critical.
Yeah, we were up at the St. Albans School, and they've got, as you know, a wonderful program there. It's universal, and we certainly heard from the kids as well as the teachers and the parents.
And one of the most connective aspects of this initiative is farm to school.
Right.
The, production of fresh and nutritious food. Some schools are trying to get 5 or 8%. Some are down in Bellows Falls as high as 27% participation. And, funding for out of the education bill is one thing, but it's very relevant to our agricultural economy, the carbon footprint of bringing produce or meat around the county as opposed to across the United States. So any advocacy, you can maybe weave that into just rural sustainable.
No, we will.
Economy.
And there are a lot of us. Thank you. And it was amazing, our trip to St. Albans, where it is a lot of local food production, a lot of local meat even, and where the universality of it was really terrific in increasing the participation for the kids. That'll be a budget fight we're going to have down there. There's, what you're going to have it here, because I know the governor is supportive of food programs, but not the universal part of it. So that'll be a battle we have. But the farm to school has gotten a lot of support for the reasons that you mentioned. And there's got to be a lot of, that has to be, I think, a partnership with the federal government making the major financial contribution to that. So I'm with you on that.
Thank you.
And I know Bernie and Becca are as well. So
Representative Levitt?
Oh, I keep hearing rumors about raising organic milk prices in the big farm bill in DC. Yes, no, what are your thoughts?
Well, I favor supply management. I always have, but we don't have the votes for that. And that wouldn't apply just to organic, conventional, but the price swings are just brutal. And not sustainable, and we're trying to get people through it. But I think having some kind of supply management is the way to go. I've supported that since I served on the agriculture committee here in the State House. I don't think we have the votes for that, and I don't think you'll get a carve out for organic versus the other. So Senator Gillibrand is going to be playing a major role in that, and she has a lot of similar challenges for dairy in upstate New York that we have here in Vermont, and we're trying to find as much as we can get towards a supply management approach that we can possibly get included in the bill.
Cool, thank you.
Representative Templeton?
Yeah, so actually there are a number of farmers in here, including myself. And I raise sheep, and I do so in a management style that sequesters carbon in soil. And I'm both elated and afraid of what happens in Washington regarding carbon farming and the practices that will be rewarded, because we do have payment for ecosystem services in Vermont, and a certain number of those payments are going to people whose other practices are not carbon friendly. So, if we're rewarding people on one end, but then at the other end, they aren't.
Right.
You see where I'm going with this. So clearly, regenerative agriculture and carbon farming has to a point been co-opted by more conventional methodologies. And I'm wondering if that's coming up at all.
I'm unaware of that, so you're educating me. And, Rebecca and Ryan, we should follow up. Because, in the whole Inflation Reduction Act, where it's the first time there's been public policy supporting carbon reduction, the decision was to go with incentives rather than sticks.
Yeah,
right?
I like that.
And I think it's working, because what essentially you have to do is create a virtuous cycle where it pays to have a process by which you're reducing carbon emissions in production. And it can be in manufacturing automobiles or it can be in sheep farming, right? But on the other hand, if you set it up so that you can just get advantage of it here, but cause more harm there, that doesn't work. And what would be helpful for me would be to learn more about what those specifics are, because we don't want to encourage the other.
Not to take other people's time away, I'd be happy to talk with you about that later.
Yeah, no, that'd be good.
Yeah.
Representative Rice.
On a similar note, obviously we've seen standards for inorganic sort of being co-opted or degraded. And I know that a lot of folks in our organic community were scared of the possibility that Senator Leahy would no longer be, in Washington as the organic champion. So can you just talk about sort of where you come to the discussion on sort of how to restore integrity to the organic program?
Just two things. Number one, with Senator Leahy in his 48 years in his position as chair of the Agriculture Committee, there's just nobody who can have that kind of clout. And that's just an acknowledgement. But it's also true that during my 16 years in Congress, and by the way, the first campaign I worked on in Vermont was as a volunteer for Patrick in his first race in the United States Senate in 1974. No, that's true.
I know.
And I was knocking on doors in White River Junction for him. And but he and Bernie and I worked very closely together and were totally aligned. He had senior member of Ag, chair of appropriations. He had a position that I don't have. Even Bernie doesn't have. But we're there in terms of it. I'm on the Ag Committee. And we had the undersecretary of the Department of Agriculture up to the Course Farm. The first week I was here, just to give you some sense of where I'm at, the first event we did was at a 6th generation dairy farm.
He came here.
Organic, pardon me?
That Course Farm came here, they testified.
Well,
Abby does.
amazing.
Yeah, Abby, yeah.
Abby. I mean, they're remarkable people, but we had the undersecretary, we were there. It's been in business since 1860, and we want to keep it going. And we had organic dairy farmers talking about that there's a fine line here where you want to have really enforceable standards so they're not co-opted by bogus, quote, organic. So you've got to have enforcement and standards. On the other hand, you can't deluge folks like the courses with excessive paperwork. And what we can do is be constant monitors. So what I was saying to the courses and the other organic farmers, if there's like a regulation that's going into effect that's just as stupid, and that can happen, you let us know concretely, and then this is where the senator can be actually quite helpful. We write a concrete letter about this regulation was intended to do X, but it's really doing Y, and take a look at it. And a lot of times we have success in getting those modified, but what it requires is some communication in real time, and we'll be responsive on trying to make certain we keep that balance. But organic it's really, there's two issues with organic, okay? I think organic has sold itself. You're just seeing that consumer choice. There was a big battle about organic. I was here, John, you probably, you saw it just up in Tunbridge. a lot of the organic farmers were resentful, or pardon me, non-organic were a little bit resentful for a period because their view was that they were doing stuff that was really good and they felt a little bit dissed with the emerging focus on organic. But then two things happened. There was a period there where organic prices were really significantly higher and the margin was much greater. You know, we've lost that now. And number two, the market. People want organic. You know, there's a real market there. So that's changed the dynamic some. And, you know, I think all of us, I can't speak for all of you, but there's a real benefit to the organic practices in terms of what the overall environmental impact is. And, you know, with people's growing concern, especially in a place like Vermont about a climate change, I think that protecting and expanding organic is really, really essential. And there's a lot of us in Congress who are of that point of view.
John, did you have a question?
Yeah, I mean, all of us here, I think, have frustrations with jurisdiction a lot, and I know you too, I'm sure. But
Yeah.
On something like cannabis, I've never heard of, is there a feeling in the ag world, in your committee and at USDA of this is a plant, really should be here, we need to deal with this nationally, because it's still, you know, that certain people in certain.
The cannabis issue in Congress is much more about banking, okay, which is essential, all right, in the Safe Banking Act, which I'm strongly in support of. But the decision about what kind of cannabis policy to have is really still, I think, state level driven, and it's not I don't see us having comprehensive legislation about cannabis that would apply across the country. But the banking part of it is where a lot of the focus is.
Yeah. It seems nutty, it's considered a more dangerous drug than fentanyl, for example.
Yeah, let's not get going on how crazy our drug policy is. Unless you want to.
We all agree.
I've got an eye on the clock, which just for the record is 3 minutes fast. So, so we get our full time as a senator. Rodney, did you have a question?
Yes, well, yeah, sort of a question. So getting back to the milk market,
Yeah,
it seems to me and some others that organic don't get their fair share of protection. And the milk margin protection program, the way it's set up, it doesn't really work for organic farms. Not getting payouts from it. Conventional farms are, just because of formula.
right.
Is there any, that's one of my questions is there any thing being done to try to correct that?
That's in play now. That's exactly right. I mean, this farm bill won't get done this year. I don't believe it'll probably be a 2-year process. But we've got on the Ag Committee, Senator Stabenow, who's really highly respected. And she's got a partner on the Republican side, John Boozman from Arkansas, who's a wonderful, wonderful guy. We may bring him up here. He asked if he could come up, and it'd be nice maybe to get together. But there's an awareness, the whole, when it comes to dairy, we're going to be having a whole debate wrangling about what adjustments have to be made. I mean, as I mentioned, I would prefer to have a supply management program. I'll make the case, but I don't think that we'll be able to get there. But I think we'll be able to make some significant adjustments to catch up with what is reality in the marketplace on the farm with the changes we need to make so that the margin protection program works. And this is where, seriously, you guys have some suggestions, concrete suggestions. Those are really helpful to me to hear. You know, it's a lot of credibility for me to be able to say, our House Agriculture Committee has recommended A or B. I mean, and it gives me some confidence that the folks here who are dealing with it day in and day out and is the closest you can be to our Vermont producers. So that's helpful. Seriously, whatever suggestions you have, I want to hear them.
I think Representative Supernaut had a question.
Hi, I'm also an organic vegetable and dairy farmer. And, the National Young Farmers Coalition has identified that access to secure land is one of the greatest barriers for young farmers to
Right.
enter this field. I will never own the land that I am farming on. And I'm just curious, what kind of conversations are happening nationally around that topic?
We actually had a hearing where folks from USDA came in and talking about some of their ideas. And I don't know what the concrete potential solutions are. And I'm going to ask you this, but when I think about that, I'm kind of freaked out about it, just seeing what's happening to housing prices, what's happening to land prices, because there's no way that as the market would define highest and best use, growing vegetables is more valuable than putting up condos or carving out an estate to sell to some multimillionaire down south. So I don't have an answer to that, but it's really unbelievably scary to me because that's a real barrier to entry. And that's a huge question that's cutting across everywhere. I mean, it's everything from your ability to get land you need to grow your crops to a young family trying to find a house, and the only thing that's on listing is an Airbnb. So that's kind of like a structural issue that I don't have an answer for.
If we have time for another question, Representative Cole.
I'll be brief as well. And this request long precedes me here in the House, but just working on these USDA requirements to allow for higher fat milk levels in school lunches. And I recognize right now we learned in the House, or yesterday we learned in this committee that there's a period of public comment available until April 10th, I believe, to speak to this issue. So I think right now more than ever, perhaps we might have a chance at incorporating those in our USDA requirements.
So you want the milk in schools?
Absolutely.
We want whole milk.
Whole milk.
Milk and
Yeah.
fat milk.
In what?
And just higher fat milk than we're allowed right now, which I believe is,
0%?
I think it's
It's 1%,
yeah.
Yeah, the kids won't drink that, I don't think.
like that.
Ongoing problem with the nutrition guidelines. I'm hearing that some of the nutrition guidelines would require us all to take monk-like vows, So it's got to be practical, and well, we'll see what happens in April. But I hope we can get the milk in the schools.
Well, can I piggyback on Esme's Representative Cole's comment for a quick second? One thing we were told was that the school nutrition standards haven't been changed since 2010. They just keep getting readopted. And so I think there could be wiggle room, because one thing we heard the other day was it's not necessarily about the amount of fat, it's about the amount of sugar. And there's more sugar in low-fat milk than there is in full-fat milk. So that might give us a way in.
It might. I mean, I'm not a nutritionist, but I grew up drinking milk at school, including every once in a while chocolate milk. Mine even farm chocolate milk, It was pretty good. And I look forward to it. It was so cool. And I love milk. I mean, what can I say? Better than soda, right?
Is that part of the farm bill, this nutrition?
The nutrition, it's not directly, we won't micromanage that, but we'll be hearing about complaints, practical complaints. The bottom line for me is that there's gotta be just practical application of the rules as opposed to just trying to write rules for this ideal society that doesn't quite yet exist, but may be our aspiration. So, we get these horror stories about what the regulations are and how they get in the way of good nutrition because kids won't eat it. So you can have great rules and then kids just not eating and then waiting until they can go get a snack and a Coke, So there's got to be some common sense here, the application. But anyway, I guess I just want to, this is my first time back in the State House, and I stopped back down and saw my old boss, Senator Mazza. And I was on his committee and he'd bring in muffins and he remembered that I used to go around and take the tops of muffins off. And eat them.
You're one of those people.
I was one of those people. So we kidded around, but this is the first substantive visit I've had with the committee here in the State House, and it's important to me that it be your committee because of the importance your work is to Vermont. And I just want to acknowledge that as a Vermonter and express my gratitude to you that you're doing this.
Well, we really
Both ways.
appreciate your making time for us.
Yeah.
And, I had one quick question. How big is the committee? How big are Senate committees?
Yeah.
Well, the Senate Judiciary Committee is 21. The Ag Committee, whereas in the House, it'd be like 65. And like in Judiciary, it's 11 Democrats and 10 Republicans. And the Ag Committee might be 14 and 13, something like that. But it's, it's smaller. I like that. I mean, you've got a nice small committee. And as I mentioned, it tends to be much more bipartisan. There's regional competition. There's competition in the support programs between big ag and local smaller ag, but that tends to cut across regions and commodities. I mean, the big challenge we have is some of the commodity programs really haven't been changed. And, from my perspective, there's too much emphasis on the big ag, and it has practices that don't ultimately serve our long-term well-being. So those are battles that occur there. But there's a big constituency about nutrition, about local agriculture. And the argument, as I mentioned, that I've always made to try to get some unity to help small ag is to be respectful of whatever that definition of small ag is in California or Idaho, because that binds us together.
Right. Good point.
So thank you. Yeah.
Peter, I made a request to our chairman and to your staff if you would honor the Ag Committee we could have a group.
Oh, I'd love that. Yeah, let's do that. Yeah, let's do that.
Could my son join us?
Sure. Yeah. That'd be great.
And I'd also like to introduce Father Rick Swanson, Episcopal priest from Stowe. He was a big leader in racial justice, homelessness, every good advocacy you could have. He's a good hockey player.
Here. Good hockey. You still playing hockey?
With him,
Are you kidding?
with Jed, 2 times a week.
Martyrs just don't know when to stop. Let's get 2 goals in here.
Yeah, we'll get some of that.
Yeah. I'll just say
Are we all in?
Am I short enough?
You're good.
Oh, yeah, I can get you all in.
Yeah.
I get too much in the chair. There we go. Okay, take a bunch. Good. Great.
Thank
I can
you.
send this to your committee assistant.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That would be great.
That'd be great.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
You all have your eyes
Thank you
open.
very much.
Good to
Take
see
care.
you.
It's good to see you.
You honored.
What is your address?
With the congressional.
I need a business card. I think I should grab some. Type in your address, that'll make it faster. And I have an informal one that with you all sitting. I'll send it.
Yeah, thank you.
What's the rest of it? Are you in that state?
Have your buddy.
We're gonna go to the cafeteria for lunch and then.
I talked to him and I told him to do that right now.
Yeah.
So
And that's something.
it'll just like.
You hungry?
It's on our.
Ready for some bad food?
That was,
If it's okay, we'd like to join you at Faux.
as.
Oh, no, that's for Tuesday.